My name is Jim Jane, and I enlisted in the Army back in 1950. I took my basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and then went to school down in Augusta, Georgia. And upon completing that, I went to the Far East. Far East Command was Korea at the time, where I processed through Japan at Camp Drake, and then went from Sasebo to Busan, Korea, and joined the 7th Infantry Division. In the 7th Infantry Division, I was a cryptographic specialist. I was assigned to the 7th Signal Company and followed the division through its period from May of 51 to March of 52. 11 months there in Korea with the division. We're Eastern Central and Eastern Central Front. We took in the fighting at Chuncheon, to Hwachun Reservoir, into Inji, the Punch Bowl were our main areas of combat. We finally had a Army Reserve in Kapyon, which is the first time that it was actually mixing with some Korean people. It was very interesting. I learned something about the Korean people at that time. Being only an 18-year-old kid, that was one of these kids out for adventure. So, yeah, I got it. When I returned from Korea, I was stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland. And as a result, I contracted malaria in Korea and had a little stint in the military hospital there in Fort Meade. Today, I'm studying Korean, trying to learn the language, trying to speak it. And we're tied in here with the Korean War Veterans Group, Chapter 314, where we are part of the Korean community here in the western part of North Carolina. And as such, they have a language school, so I'm going to that. And actually learning Korean language. It's a little different than what I thought. It's trying at times, but I really enjoy it. What I enjoy the most, though, is the Korean people themselves. They're very, very courteous people, kind and loving people. When I look back on it, and I look at when I made my first visit to Korea after the war, I was thoroughly amazed to see what the Korean people had done with the freedom that we gave them. Of course, they call us heroes. I don't consider myself a hero. I went there, I did a job, and I come home. But to them, we're heroes. But it's just amazing to look back on it today and to see how far Korea has come from where they were when I was there.
You mentioned the Punch Bowl. What was that to people that have no knowledge of what the Korean War was?
Well, the Punch Bowl was an area that was shaped more like a bowl. The 1st Marine was in there, and our 17th Regiment was there. We were usually pretty much tied with the 1st Marine. So we made a lot of advances in there in conjunction with the 1st Marine. But it was a strategic point. It controlled quite an area. It had a lot to do with Hwachun. Hwachun was the big hydroelectric dam there, which we needed and we took and we held.
Were you involved in that long march when the Chinese came in and started pushing our troops back?
I came in just after the Incheon invasion, so I wasn't in that Chosun section. I came in when we were below the 38th, the second time, and we advanced above the 38th, and that's when we took Chuncheon and Huachun and that area, and we were into the Punch Bowl.
What were some of your personal experiences? I assume you were in battle at some point there. How did that affect you, and how did your buddies handle the situation?
Well, I was a cryptographic specialist, so I was supposedly not permitted on the front line.
Okay.
I knew too much to be captured. But I used to go along a shotgun to the message guys. So I did get up to the front line. I did get into action a couple of times. It was short, swift. I just can't conceive of the mass assault tactics of the Chinese.
You were saying earlier you had read some tactics for that.
I've read the book Sun Tzu, The Art of War. And in reading that, it's the Chinese battle plan, and it goes back in centuries when China was small kingdoms. And when I look at Korea today and their battle tactics, they didn't change. They used the same tactics then that they used 1,000 years ago, with the horn, the drum, the flags. Same thing. Going into the high ground, advance in the front, pull back, and pincer movement. Same thing. Your typical Chinese battle plan.
How did you find that people, when you were over there during the war, were they appreciative of the troops, or did they have problems with our troops? Or?
Well, the Korean people, I think, were appreciative of our troops because we meant freedom to them. But they were pretty poor. Food was scarce. They didn't have the commodities that we normally have here. To get your clothes done, you take a bar of GI soap and cut it in quarters. And Mama-san would use 1/4, and the other quarter she would use. And you'd pay her with the other half. They didn't have food. And the hardest thing was the kids. They had these little rubber slippers that they wore in the wintertime. And the winter times there were 30, 40 below zero. And when we went through the mess hall, we had the garbage cans, what we call garbage cans. What we didn't eat, we put in it. But these kids would try to take care of that can. To them, that was food. So it's looking at that, yeah, it's pretty hard.
You said you've been back several times?
I've been back twice.
Twice. I assume that the country has grown quite rapidly in those 50 years or so.
I was amazed. I never seen a paved road when I was there the first time in Korea. I stood in a hotel on the 12th floor and I looked out on Jamsil Boulevard. And there was 10 lanes paved. 2 lanes for buses, 4 lanes each way for traffic. There was 12 different bus lines, 9 different transits or subway systems, rapid transit, and you could take a train from Seoul to Busan in 2 hours and 10 minutes. It's not the Korea I knew. Western-style homes, concrete apartments. In a concrete apartment complex, maybe 60, 80 apartments, 15, 20 stories high. And amazing, in that complex, each complex had its own grade school and high school, and there are girls who are separate from the boys. They have their own police station, their own firehouse, and they have their own hospital in each one of those complexes, and their own post office as well. It's just amazing.
You said that earlier we were talking at lunch, and somebody said something about the Korean community here in Hendersonville, Asheville area has get-togethers, and that they're very appreciative of what the U.S. soldiers did during the Korean War and are still doing, because the war is still technically isn't over with. How did that come about? Did they contact you, or?
Well, we were contacted through Yang Lee, who was president of the Western North Carolina Korean community, and we developed a very close relationship with them. In fact, we were presented a certificate as honorary members of that community. We go to their New Year's celebration, their picnics that they have. We're treated like heroes. They are very appreciative of what we did. Some of them are old enough to have come through some of it as children, so they know it, and they express it.
Very good. Well, thank you. If you have anything else that you want to say that we didn't touch on, or?
I think that's enough.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. But I hope that come out okay.
It should. The sound looked pretty good, and the filming looked good.
Good.
So we should. Okay. Go ahead.
My name is Roy G. Bird. I joined the Army in July of 1949 at the age of 18. I took my basic training at Fort Riley, Kansas, and after basic training I was sent to Fort Hood, Texas, where this was in about September of 1949, and I stayed there till July of 1950. On a Sunday morning in the middle of July, we were called out to all out, and we stood, and we were told that we were going to Korea. At that time, Korea, we never even heard of the name. This was at about 6:30 Sunday morning. Sunday afternoon, we were loaded on I would say approximately a 25-car troop train to Fort Lewis, Washington, where we stayed about 3 days getting shots and everything. And then we went to Olympia, Washington. We were put on a Merchant Marine transport ship, and we spent 18 days between Olympia, Washington, and pulled into Busan, Korea about the 18th or 20th of July. At that time, the front line was pretty much right there at Busan. The 24th and the 25th Infantry Division were pretty much pushed into the ocean. When we got off the ship, I was given a carbine with 6 rounds of ammo, and you could hear the shots out in the echo of the valley. And we were just kids, and at that time, most of everything that I was with at that time were World War II veterans. And so as kids, we pretty much got under the 2.5 tons in the rear wheels, and we were so scared, and they were coming down through their sergeant say, don't shoot, don't shoot. And then I ended up being put in a the 105 howitzer unit as a driver for a CO on an ammunition train section. And our job was to take 105 ammo from what we call the dump to the front lines and back. And I did that, I don't know how long, for maybe a month. One night we were going over a mountain, and we were ambushed by guerrilla snipers. They had, what do I want to call it? Like flares, but I can't think of the name of things now. But it lit up the area so they could see us and everything, seen the convoy, and they started shooting from the top of the mountain down to where the road was, and I was hit and got a bullet in my leg in the tibia, and I finally got to the end of the bottom of the mountain. I was put in a bus with some South Korean soldiers and taken to a MASH outfit where I was told that I may lose my leg, and I didn't want to do that, so they said, well, we'll probably give you maybe a 50-50 chance of saving it. I said, well, what do we got to lose? So then I boarded one of these, at that time they called a Bell helicopter with what looked like a casket on the side, a little box. And then I was flown to Busan, which I wasn't that far out of Busan, and put on a hospital ship. I remember going down this, they lifted me down the hole of this ship, and it was a beautiful berth that I was put in. And I don't know, the next time when I woke up that I can remember, I was in the Army Hospital in Osaka, Japan. I stayed there, I don't know how many days, and then they put us, as we had no clothes, just a sheet over us. We were put on a train, and we were tied down to the top of the seats and everything. And we were taken then from Osaka to Tokyo. And by the time I got to Tokyo, back then those trains were all coal, and we went through the mountains and everything. The sheet was black pretty much from the coal dust. We got to Tokyo. At the Tokyo I don't know what big airfield and everything, at the airport, I guess. And you could see litters laying all over the field out there being ready to be loaded. I got loaded. I got in the tail of this plane. It was, I don't know what they call 54, C-54 or 47. I'm not that familiar with the Air Force. And we were stacked maybe 3 high in litters, and they put army blankets over, and there was no insulation in this plane. It was just the walls, and it got cold up there, and they kept bringing us blankets to keep us warm and everything. And then I went from there, and we landed at Midway Island, and at that time those were all prop planes, and I had a little window. I was strapped down for probably about 4 straps over me with the litter and everything on down, and it looked like the prop was hitting the water as we were landing. And here you can't do nothing, just sit there and wonder, whoa, are we going to go in the ocean or where we're at? So we stayed there and had breakfast. I went from there. I was flown next to Honolulu, Hawaii, to a big Army hospital on top of the mountain called Tripler Army Hospital. I don't know how many days I was there. Then I was sent on to Fairfield, Susan in California, an airstrip, and with hospital there for some time. And then from Denver, I was sent from there to Fitzsimmons Army Hospital in Denver, Colorado. Then we were split up a lot of different places around the country. They tried to get it as close to home. My home was out of Michigan, and they ended up at Great Lakes Naval Training Center, where then I was sent there. Then after about 4 or 5 months being in the hospital there, they opened up an old hospital in Michigan in Battle Creek. It was called in Battle Creek. I can't think of the thing now, but it was back in the old days. It was like a TB sanitarium. Then they opened it up for World War II and everything. And then I got into there at Fort Custer and everything. And after that, I was finally got out of the hospital, was sent to Fort Riley, back to Fort Riley for reassignment.
So you kept your leg?
I kept my leg.
Okay.
I kept my leg. I had a .30 caliber through the tibia. It splintered it all up like, looked like toothpicks. But it worked out, and I kept it and everything. So then they wouldn't let me go back to a line outfit. So they sent me to what they call Fort Sheridan, Illinois, which was just outside of Chicago, and they put me in the finance corps. So I ended up for about a year, and then I extended my enlistment from 3 to 4 years, and I went to Army Finance School at Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana, then came back to Fort Sheridan, and I spent rest of my time there.
Very good. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you for taking it.
Hi, I'm Bill Lack. Let me clear my throat and start over. Can we do that?
Yeah. That's what I paid the editor for.
Okay. Hi, my name is Bill Lack. I've got a story that I think is important to me. I don't know if anyone else is interested in it, but I'm a veteran of the Korean War. I think that all of us veterans feel like we need to tell somebody before we die off, otherwise they won't ever learn what happened in Korea, why the war was fought, what we did. Did we gain anything? I think we did. First of all, it's the only war we've ever fought that was solely against stopping communism. Everybody thinks the Korean War was something that you would assume that we were fighting Koreans. Mostly, we were fighting Chinese and Russians. The Russians weren't on the front lines fighting, but they were operating the equipment, doing the planning, for supplying and doing everything. And the Chinese were doing all the hard work, and most of the Koreans had already been defeated, so we didn't have that many Koreans to contend with. I always kind of felt like I looked up to the World War II veterans. My father and both of his brothers, all three of my mother's brothers, all served in World War II. So veterans were a big thing to me, and I looked up to them, I respected them, but I just wasn't old enough to go. But in my senior year in high school, I joined the National Guard. But actually, between my junior and senior year, I joined the Mississippi National Guard, and we were at summer camp at Fort McClellan, Alabama, when the North Koreans crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. Well, they immediately put our unit on alert, and we thought for a while we're not even going to go home, but we went back home. That was in July. We went back home, and it was December before President Harry Truman made a speech and called our units to active duty, and all of the Mississippi and Alabama National Guard. Well, I went on, tried to learn as much as I could, be as good a soldier as I could, and finished up my obligation and was discharged. But I'd never been to Korea. And I had came home and enrolled at the University of Southern Mississippi with the intention of playing football and maybe doing a little boxing there. And went home for Christmas holidays, and it was just bugging me that I'd never been to Korea. You know, I did all that training and it was such what I considered a pretty good soldier, but I'd never been to Korea. So I went down to the recruiting office and I re-enlisted in the Army with the expectation they would ask for and question them, can I go to Korea? I'll do it if you'll get me sent to Korea, because I wanted to be a part of it. Well, I wound up going to Japan. Stayed in Japan a few weeks and found out that while I was in Japan, they were training us for a special mission in Korea. So 36 of us were in a select unit, and we got sent to Korea. And anyhow, I was working with the Prisoner of War Command, and I was up and down. I was all over Korea, all the way from 38th parallel down to the tip of the peninsula. I was out on Kojido, where we had Chinese communist prisoners, and down on Chejido, where we had the Chinese communist prisoners, and Kojido, where we had the North Korean communist prisoners. And then we had 16 other camps, all scattered all over Korea. So I was one of them that got to see almost all of South Korea, up and down from every major town in South Korea I've been in. And then when the war ended, finally the war ended, and I got assigned up to the the same 36, got selected, and we were up doing the actual exchanging of the prisoners. We were turning over so many Chinese or Korean prisoners, getting so many Americans back, and putting them on ships and sending them back home. And some of us would go and take the trip back to San Francisco, and then go down to Air Force Base and Travis Air Force Base, and then fly back to Kimpo in Korea and do it all over again. But it was just a very interesting and a very important part of my life, and I just wanted to say that if you know any Korean War veterans, tell them to get in touch with me. I would like to talk to them. I like to share stories with them. I like to thank them for what they've done, because all of us didn't do hand-to-hand fighting. I didn't suffer the cold and the frostbite and all that some of them did. I didn't have the hardships that the ones who were there first had, but it was pretty tough anyway. But anyway, I like to find these old-timers and tell them thank you. And the only way I can find them is if somebody points them out to me. You don't just see somebody on the street and know they're a Korean War veteran, because they don't normally talk about it.
How would somebody get in touch with you to come to your organization in
Okay.
Hendersonville,
We meet at the American Legion in Hendersonville,
North Carolina?
in North Carolina, Hendersonville, North Carolina, at the American Legion, and we meet at noon, 12 o'clock for lunch, and the meeting starts at 1 p.m., and that's the second Wednesday of every month. And visitors are welcome. You don't even have to be a Korean War veteran. If your father was, your uncle was, or something, come tell us about them. We just like to keep it, because you don't learn about this. This is a strange war. You don't learn about it in the schools. It's not in the history books. But technically, it's still an ongoing war. We only have a truce. We didn't have, a ceasefire. We didn't have a truce. But the ceasefire is all it is. We've been on a ceasefire since 1953. And that's a long time to be technically still at war. And it just sort of beginning to bother me as I'm getting a little older. It's beginning to bother me that nobody ever talks about it. You hear a lot about Vietnam, you hear about Iraq, you hear about Afghanistan, and you hear about the World War II veterans. Well, let's face it, World War II veterans are only 5 years older than us. The Korean War was 5 years after World War II ended. So probably a good 50% of the Korean War veterans are also World War II veterans. So when the World War II veterans, many of them, when they die off, there was a Korean War veteran that died with them, because they were from both wars. But anyway, I just kind of like to talk to as many of them as I can, and kind of socialize with them and get to know them. And but again, my name is Bill Lack, and you can come to one of our meetings, and we'd be very welcome. Love to have you.
Where do you meet at?
We meet at the American Legion in Hendersonville, North Carolina, on the second Wednesday of each month at 12 o'clock for lunch, 1 o'clock for the meeting. And you're welcome to join us. Thank you for putting up with me and listening to me.